Imagine swiping through a dating app. Now imagine your father is the one swiping for you. And he is not looking for chemistry. He is looking for the person whose family has the best business connections and is willing to pay him a small fortune for the privilege of marrying you. That, in a nutshell, was the reality of finding a partner in Renaissance Europe. Welcome to 10-Minute History. I'm your host, Jake Sullivan, and today we're throwing out everything you think you know about romance and diving into the intricate, high-stakes dance of courtship and marriage in the age of Michelangelo and Shakespeare. First things first, let's get one thing straight. The idea of dating as we know it, two people going out to see if they like each other, would have been completely alien to someone in the 15th century. What they had was courtship, and it was less of a romantic comedy and more of a corporate merger. The goal was singular, marriage. And marriage was not about finding your soulmate. It was a public negotiation between two families to secure their future. A good match could secure a family's fortune for generations. A bad one could lead to financial ruin and social shame. Love, if it happened at all, was expected to be a quiet consequence of the marriage, not the reason for it. It was something that might hopefully grow later, like a potted plant you receive as part of a business deal. So how did this all begin? It started in what historians call the marriage market. And the shoppers were almost always the parents, particularly the father. They had a very specific checklist, and a good sense of humor was not at the top. Number one was lineage and social status. The goal was to marry your child into a family of equal or higher standing. Number two, and this was crucial, was wealth, specifically the bride's dowry. This was the money, land, and goods her family would pay to the groom's family. A massive dowry could make up for a less prestigious family name, or, shall we say, a face for radio. Next came reputation. For a young woman, this meant one thing and one thing only, her virginity. Even a whisper of scandal could make her completely unmarriageable. Health was also a factor, as the primary biological purpose of the union was to produce healthy heirs. This ruthless checklist often led to a huge age gap. Men needed time to build a career and afford a wife, so they often married in their 30s or even 40s. Their brides? They were typically in their mid to late teens, an age that maximized fertility and pretty much guaranteed they were virgins. A 30-year-old groom and a 16-year-old bride was a common pairing in cities like Florence. Now, you could not just walk up to a family and ask about their daughter's dowry. That would be uncivilized. In sophisticated cities like Florence, you would hire a professional, a marriage broker, known as a sensale. Think of him as a walking, talking 16th century version of LinkedIn and a dating app rolled into one. This man knew every eligible young man and woman in the city, their family's social standing, and crucially, the likely size of their dowry. A father would give the sensale his requirements, and the broker would discreetly find a match, preventing any family from losing face if a direct offer was rejected. But families still needed to see the product for themselves. Since private meetings were forbidden, public spaces became showrooms. A young woman might be strategically placed on her family's balcony, doing needlework, so suitors could window shop. The most common viewing place, however, was church. It was one of the few places an unmarried woman could be seen in public, and you can bet that potential in-laws were judging her piety, her posture, and her modest clothing. Once a potential match was found, the real work began, the negotiation. This was a hard-nosed business deal conducted by the fathers, often with a lawyer-like figure called a notary. They would hammer out a legally binding marriage contract that specified everything, especially the dowry. The dowry was the engine of the entire system. In competitive cities, this led to insane dowry inflation, where families would beggar themselves to attract a good match for their daughter. The problem got so bad in Florence that the government created something called the Monte delle Doti, or the Dowry Fund, in 1425. It was a government-backed investment fund where a father could deposit money when his daughter was born, and the state would pay it back with interest when she was old enough to marry. The very existence of a state-run savings plan for dowries shows you just how central this financial transaction was to the entire society. Now, while the fathers were in a back room haggling over cash and property, a very different and much more romantic-looking process was happening in public. This was the performance of courtship. An educated suitor was expected to write flowery sonnets for his beloved, praising her eyes as stars and her heart as ice, all in the fashionable style of the poet Petrarch. He would send symbolic gifts like gloves or handkerchiefs. If a lady wore his gift in public, it was a signal that the deal was moving forward. But the ultimate courtship gift was the cassone. These were huge, beautifully painted wooden chests that the groom's family commissioned for the bride. They were not just furniture. They were major works of art, sometimes painted by the workshops of famous artists like Botticelli. And the paintings on them were not subtle. A popular theme was the story of Griselda, a wife who endures horrible tests of her obedience from her husband without complaint. It was basically a giant, expensive piece of luggage with a painted-on instruction manual for how to be a good, submissive wife. And of course, during this entire time, the young couple was never, ever left alone. The bride-to-be was constantly watched by a chaperone, often an older female relative called a duenna in Spain, to protect the family's most precious asset, her honor. This system was not the same for everyone. For kings and queens, marriage was pure international diplomacy. The Habsburgs, one of Europe's most powerful families, built their empire almost entirely through marriage, living by the motto, "Let others wage war, you, happy Austria, marry." For a peasant farmer, the stakes were different but just as serious. The dowry might be a cow and a few pots, and the ideal spouse was simply a strong, healthy partner who could help on the farm. But this raises a huge question. Did anyone actually fall in love? The answer is a definite yes, but it was incredibly dangerous. Passionate love was seen as a form of madness, a disruptive force that threatened the all-important family strategy. The story of Romeo and Juliet was not just a fantasy. Its central conflict between personal love and family duty was a very real dilemma. Choosing love over your family's wishes could lead to being disowned, financial ruin, and total social shame. And this orderly system had a very messy, hypocritical underside. It was built on a massive sexual double standard. A woman's honor depended on absolute chastity. But for a man, sexual experience outside of marriage was often seen as a biological necessity. This demand was met by a huge and thriving industry of prostitution in every major city, which was seen as a necessary evil to protect the virginity of honorable women. Society also brutally condemned any form of same-sex relationship. In Florence, they even created a special police force called the Officers of the Night, whose only job was to hunt down and prosecute men for sodomy. The records from this court reveal a hidden world of desire that existed in the shadows, a stark contrast to the public performance of patriarchal order. So, the path to the altar in the Renaissance was a perilous and calculated journey. It was a public business deal, not a private romance. It was driven by economics, with the dowry as its engine, and it solidified a patriarchal family structure that would dominate the Western world for centuries. But it also created some of our most enduring cultural stories, from the star-crossed lovers to the witty battle of the sexes. And believe it or not, echoes of this world are all around us today. Think about it. A modern dating profile, where you list your job, education, and carefully selected photos, is really just a digital dowry list. The app's algorithm is the new senseo, the professional matchmaker. And a prenuptial agreement? That is a direct descendant of the Renaissance marriage contract, a pragmatic recognition that marriage is also an economic partnership. It just goes to show that while the technology and customs change, the fundamental human dance of balancing love, power, and social strategy remains fascinatingly the same. So what are your thoughts on this? Could you have survived the Renaissance marriage market? Let us know down in the comments. If you found this interesting or learned something new, please give this video a like. And don't forget to subscribe to 10-Minute History for more deep dives. Thanks for listening.